Rachel wiped the sweat from her forehead as she clocked out of her shift at Memorial Hospital. 14 hours. 14 straight hours of running between patients, dealing with emergencies, and barely having time to use the bathroom. Her feet ached in a way that made her want to cry, but she couldn't. Not yet. She still had to pick up the twins from her neighbor's apartment. The elevator ride down felt like the longest minutes of her life. She leaned against the cold metal wall and closed her eyes. 5 years. 5 years of doing this alone. 5 years of double shifts and missed sleep. 5 years of watching her boys ask questions she didn't know how to answer. "Mama, why don't we have a daddy like other kids?" The question from this morning still echoed in her head. Little Michael had asked it so innocently while eating his cereal. His brother Daniel had just looked down at his bowl, quiet as always. Daniel never asked questions like that, but she knew he wondered the same thing. Rachel's phone buzzed in her pocket. Another bill. The hospital wanted payment for the twins' last checkup. She stared at the number at the bottom of the email. $247. She had maybe $60 in her account until next Friday. Something inside her snapped. She pulled up her messages and found the contact she'd been avoiding for months. The father of her children. The man who'd promised he'd always be there and then vanished the moment she told him she was pregnant. She'd tried to reach him dozens of times over the years. He never responded. But tonight she was too tired to care about dignity or pride. Her thumbs moved fast across the screen, anger and exhaustion fueling every word. "You've ignored your sons for 5 years. They ask about you every single day, and I have to look into their faces and make excuses for you. The least you could do is help with their medical bills. They're your children too. They deserve so much better than this." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The message showed as delivered. Fine. He'd probably ignore this one too, just like all the others. But at least she'd said something. At least she'd tried. Rachel shoved her phone back in her pocket and headed to Mrs. Chen's apartment on the 3rd floor. The elderly woman watched the twins whenever Rachel worked late, refusing to take more than $20 even though Rachel knew it wasn't enough. They were angels, as always, Mrs. Chen said, ushering the sleepy boys toward their mother. Michael was already half asleep, his dinosaur backpack sliding off one shoulder. Daniel walked quietly beside him, always the protector even at 5 years old. "Thank you so much," Rachel said, handing over a $20 bill. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You're a good mother," Mrs. Chen said softly, squeezing her hand. "Those boys are lucky to have you." Rachel didn't feel like a good mother as she trudged up 2 more flights to their small apartment. She felt like she was drowning and nobody was throwing her a rope, but she smiled anyway as she unlocked the door and guided her sons inside. "Okay, boys. Quick bath, then bed. We've got to be up early tomorrow. Can we have a story?" Michael asked, rubbing his eyes. "2 stories, Daniel added quietly. Rachel's heart squeezed. Of course. 2 stories. An hour later, both boys were asleep in the bedroom they shared. Rachel finally allowed herself to collapse on the worn couch in their tiny living room. The apartment was small, outdated, and the heater barely worked in winter, but it was theirs. She'd worked so hard to keep this place, to give her son some stability. Her phone buzzed. Probably another bill, she thought, not even wanting to look, but something made her pick it up anyway. The message wasn't from a billing company. It was from the number she'd texted earlier. Her heart jumped. He'd actually responded. She opened the message. "I think there's been some mistake. I don't have children, but your message concerns me. Can you clarify?" Rachel's stomach dropped. She looked at the contact name. Then she looked at the actual phone number below it. Her blood ran cold. No, 1 digit. She'd typed 1 wrong digit when she'd saved his number years ago. All those messages she thought she'd been sending to her ex, all those desperate texts over the years, they'd been going to a complete stranger? Her hand shook as she typed back, "I'm so sorry. Wrong number. Please ignore that message." She was about to put the phone down, mortified beyond belief, when 3 dots appeared. The stranger was typing again. "Before I ignore it, I need to ask you something. Seattle, spring of 2020? Rachel's entire world tilted sideways. The phone slipped from her hands and landed on the couch beside her. Seattle, spring of 2020. That medical conference. That one weekend that had changed her entire life. She'd been a nursing student back then, attending her first major conference. He'd been a speaker, though she hadn't known who he was at first. They'd met at the hotel bar after one of the seminars. He was older, confident, and for one night she'd felt like someone special instead of a broke student working 3 jobs. She'd never gotten his last name. They'd spent one perfect weekend together, and then he'd flown back to wherever he came from. She'd had no way to contact him. By the time she realized she was pregnant, she'd tried everything to find him. But Alexander from Seattle, who worked in tech, was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Eventually, she'd given up and assumed she'd be raising her babies alone. Then she'd met David, who'd seemed so perfect at first. He'd promised to love her and the babies as his own. She'd been so desperate for help, for partnership, that she'd believed him. But the moment the twins were born, David had disappeared too. Now 5 years later, a wrong number text had just connected her with the actual father of her children. Rachel's hands trembled as she picked up the phone again. The stranger, this Alexander, was still waiting for an answer. She could lie. She could say no, wrong person, and block the number. She could keep living her life exactly as it was, struggling but surviving. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Michael's face this morning, asking why they didn't have a daddy. She saw Daniel's quiet acceptance of a life without a father. Like he'd already learned not to hope for things that wouldn't happen. Her thumbs moved across the screen. Yes, Seattle, spring, 2020. 3 dots appeared. Immediately, disappeared, appeared again. Whoever this man was, he was as shaken as she was. Finally, a message came through. I need your address. I'm sending a car. We need to talk about the twins. Rachel's heart hammered in her chest. How did you even find me? I have resources. The car will be there tomorrow morning at 9. Please be ready. This is important. She should say no. She should tell this stranger to leave her alone. But something in his messages felt different from David's empty promises. There was a seriousness there, a weight to his words. Okay, she typed back. 9 o'clock. Rachel set her phone down and stared at the ceiling of her small apartment. Tomorrow morning, a car would arrive. Tomorrow, everything might change. She didn't know if she should be terrified or hopeful. In the next room, her boys slept peacefully, unaware that their lives were about to be turned upside down. She'd spent 5 years protecting them, providing for them, being both mother and father. Now their real father knew they existed. Rachel didn't sleep at all that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. What was she supposed to say to this man? How do you tell someone they have 2 5-year-old sons they never knew existed? And what if he didn't believe her? What if he thought she was some kind of scammer trying to trap him? At 6 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and started getting the twins ready. Michael was bouncing around the apartment like usual, full of energy even though the sun had barely risen. Daniel sat quietly at the kitchen table, watching her with those dark, serious eyes that always seemed to see too much. Mama, why are you nervous? Daniel asked softly. Rachel's hands froze while pouring cereal. Sometimes Daniel's awareness scared her. He was 5 years old but understood emotions like someone much older. I'm not nervous, baby. Just tired from work. You're lying, Daniel said, not mean, just matter of fact. Your hands are shaking. Michael looked up from his dinosaur toys. Are we in trouble? No, of course not. Rachel knelt down between them, putting a hand on each of their shoulders. Listen, Mrs. Chen is going to watch you this morning for a few hours. I have to go to a meeting. What kind of meeting? Michael asked. Rachel hesitated. What could she possibly say? A grown-up meeting. It's boring stuff. But I'll be back before lunch, I promise. At 8:30, she knocked on Mrs. Chen's door. The elderly woman took one look at Rachel's face and pulled her inside. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Rachel glanced at the twins, who were already settling in front of Mrs. Chen's old television. She lowered her voice. Remember how I told you about the boy's father? The one from before David? Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. He found out. About them. He's coming here this morning. After 5 years? Mrs. Chen's eyes went wide. How did he even know? It's complicated. I'll explain everything later. I just need to know the boys are safe here while I deal with this. Mrs. Chen squeezed her hand. They're always safe with me. You go. Handle whatever you need to handle. Back in her apartment, Rachel changed clothes 3 times. Everything felt wrong. Too casual made her look like she didn't care. Too dressy made her look like she was trying too hard. She finally settled on jeans and a simple blue sweater. At 8:55, she stood by her window, watching the street below. At exactly 9 o'clock, a black limousine pulled up in front of her building. A limousine. In front of her rundown apartment building in a neighborhood where people struggled to pay rent. Rachel felt her legs go weak. What kind of man sends a limousine? Who was this Alexander person? She watched as a driver in a suit stepped out and looked up at the building. Her phone rang. Hello? Ms. Torres? The voice was professional, calm. I'm Mr. Blackwood's driver. I'm downstairs. Shall I come up, or would you prefer to come down? Rachel's mind was spinning. I'll come down. She grabbed her purse with shaking hands and headed for the door. In the elevator, she caught her reflection in the scratched metal doors. She looked terrified. She forced herself to take deep breaths. Whatever happened in the next few hours, she'd survived worse. She'd made it through pregnancy alone, through childbirth, through 5 years of raising twins on a nurse's salary. She could handle this. The driver was waiting by the limo, holding the door open. He was older, maybe 60, with kind eyes that reminded her of her grandfather. Ms. Torres, he said with a slight nod. My name is Thomas. Mr. Blackwood is waiting at his residence. It's about a 30-minute drive. Rachel slid into the back seat, feeling completely out of place. The interior was all leather and polished wood. There was a bottle of water waiting in the cup holder with a small note attached. I thought you might be nervous. The water might help. We'll talk soon, Alexander. Her hands were definitely shaking now. She opened the water and took a sip, trying to calm her racing heart. Thomas pulled into traffic and Rachel watched her neighborhood disappear behind them. They drove through the city, moving from her working-class area into neighborhoods she'd only seen on television. The buildings got taller, newer, more expensive with each mile. Thomas? She finally asked. What does Mr. Blackwood do? Thomas glanced at her in the rearview mirror and she saw something like sympathy in his eyes. He owns Blackwood Technologies, ma'am. He's one of the largest tech investors in the country. Rachel felt like she might throw up. A billionaire. She'd accidentally sent that angry text message to a billionaire, and now she was on her way to tell him he had 2 5-year-old sons. The limo pulled up in front of a building that looked like it belonged in a magazine. All glass and steel reaching up into the sky. Thomas opened her door and gestured toward the entrance. Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. Top floor. The security desk will direct you. Rachel's legs felt like jelly as she walked through the lobby. Everything was marble and chrome. The security guard checked her name on a list and directed her to a private elevator that went straight to the penthouse. The elevator ride felt like it took forever, and no time at all. When the doors opened, she stepped directly into an apartment that was bigger than the entire floor of her building. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the whole city spread out below. Modern furniture, expensive art on the walls, everything perfect and pristine. And standing by those massive windows staring out at the view was a man in dark pants and a white shirt. He turned when he heard the elevator and Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She recognized him immediately. Even after 5 years, even though they'd only spent 1 weekend together, she knew that face. Those dark eyes, that strong jawline. Michael had his nose. Daniel had his serious expression. Rachel, Alexander said, and his voice was exactly how she remembered it. Deep, careful, controlled, but underneath she could hear something else. Uncertainty. Fear. Hi, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, 2 people whose lives had intersected for 1 brief weekend 5 years ago, who'd created 2 whole human beings together without knowing it. Thank you for coming, Alexander finally said. I know this must be incredibly strange for you. Strange doesn't even begin to cover it, Rachel said, finding her voice. You sent a limousine to my apartment. You found my address somehow, and apparently you're some kind of tech billionaire? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I prefer entrepreneur, but yes, I own several companies. He gestured to a couch. Please sit. We have a lot to discuss. Rachel sat, perching on the edge of the expensive leather like she might break it. Alexander sat across from her, and she noticed his hands were clasped tightly together. He was nervous too. Somehow that made her feel slightly better. I need to understand what happened, Alexander said quietly. That weekend in Seattle. I've thought about it more times than I can count over the years. You disappeared. I went back to the hotel the next morning and you were just gone. I tried to find you, but I didn't even know your last name. I had to catch an early flight, Rachel said. I was just a nursing student. I couldn't afford to miss my classes. She took a breath. I didn't know how to find you either. And then I found out I was pregnant and I tried everything to track you down. But Alexander in Seattle, who works in tech, isn't exactly specific information. You were pregnant, he said softly, like he was still trying to process the words. With twins, 2 boys. Michael and Daniel. They just turned 5 last month. Alexander stood up suddenly and walked back to the windows. Rachel could see his shoulders were tense, his hands shoved in his pockets. I have sons, he said, almost to himself. For 5 years I've had sons and I didn't know. I'm not here for money, Rachel said quickly. That text last night, I thought I was sending it to someone else. Someone who promised to help and then vanished. I never meant to— Stop, Alexander interrupted, turning to face her. His eyes were intense, focused completely on her. I don't think you're after money. What I think is that I've missed 5 years of my children's lives. 5 years of birthdays and first words and learning to walk. 5 years that I can never get back. There was real pain in his voice. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. I did the best I could, she whispered. I worked every shift I could get. I kept them fed and safe and loved. They're good boys. They're smart and kind and I'm sure they're incredible, Alexander said, his voice softer now. You raised them alone. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't. The tears were falling now and she couldn't stop them. It's been the hardest thing I've ever done. Alexander moved to sit beside her, not touching but close. He pulled a tissue box from the side table and offered it to her. I want to help, he said. I want to be part of their lives if you'll let me. But I understand if you need time to think about this. Rachel wiped her eyes. There's something we should do first. Before anything else. What's that? A DNA test. You should be sure. Absolutely sure. Alexander was quiet for a moment. I'm already sure, he said. But yes, you're right. We should make it official. He pulled out his phone. I have a private medical service. They can be here within the hour. Completely confidential. Of course he had a private medical service. Rachel almost laughed at the absurdity of her life right now. Okay, she agreed. Let's do this right. Alexander made the call, speaking in low tones to someone on the other end. When he hung up, he looked at Rachel with an expression she couldn't quite read. While we wait, he said carefully, would you tell me about them? About Michael and Daniel? I want to know everything. 3 days felt like 3 years. Rachel went through the motions at work, took care of the twins, made dinner, gave baths, read bedtime stories. But the whole time her mind was somewhere else, waiting, wondering, worrying about what would happen when the test results came back. The medical team had been professional and quick. They'd taken samples from Alexander right there in his penthouse, and then Thomas had driven her to a private clinic where they'd taken hers. The doctor assured them results would be available within 72 hours. Now those 72 hours were almost up, and Rachel felt like she might crawl out of her skin from anxiety. She was folding laundry in her tiny living room when her phone rang. Alexander's name flashed on the screen. Her hands went numb. Hello? Rachel. His voice was different, thick with emotion. The results came back. Can I come over? I think we should discuss this in person. Is it? She couldn't finish the sentence. 30 minutes. I'll be there in 30 minutes. He hung up before she could respond. Rachel looked around her small apartment. The toys scattered on the floor. The crayon marks on the wall that she'd never been able to completely scrub off. The second-hand furniture and the curtains that didn't quite match. This was her life. Her real life. And a billionaire was about to walk right into it. She spent the next 20 minutes in a panic, shoving toys into bins and wiping down surfaces. The twins were at Mrs. Chen's for the afternoon, thank God. She didn't know how to explain any of this to them yet. When the knock came, she jumped like someone had fired a gun. She opened the door to find Alexander standing there, and he looked completely different from the polished businessman she'd met 3 days ago. His hair was messy, like he'd been running his hands through it. His eyes were red. He was holding a manila envelope. Can I come in? Rachel stepped aside. He walked into her apartment and looked around, taking in every detail. She felt embarrassed by how small everything was, how worn and used. But Alexander didn't seem to notice or care. He just stood in the middle of her living room, holding that envelope like it contained the secrets of the universe. They're mine, he said quietly. Michael and Daniel. They're my sons. Even though Rachel had known this was coming, hearing the words out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. She sat down hard on the couch. 99.9% match, Alexander continued, his voice shaking slightly. I have 2 5-year-old boys who I've never met. 2 sons who don't even know I exist. Alexander, I've already contacted my lawyers, he said, starting to pace. We'll set up trust funds immediately. Education funds, medical expenses, whatever they need. I'll have papers drawn up for child support, backdated to when they were born. And we should discuss living arrangements. This apartment isn't suitable for 3 people. I can find you something bigger, safer, in a better neighborhood. Stop. Rachel stood up, her voice firm. Just stop talking for a second. Alexander looked at her, surprised. She imagined people didn't tell him to stop talking very often. You can't just swoop in here with your money and your lawyers and start rearranging our entire lives, Rachel said, crossing her arms. These are human beings we're talking about. My sons, your sons, not a business deal you can just throw money at. I'm trying to help, Alexander said, frustration creeping into his voice. I've missed 5 years. 5 years of their lives that I can never get back. The least I can do is make sure they have everything they need going forward. They don't need everything, Rachel shot back. They need a father who actually knows them, who shows up and stays, not just signs checks from a distance. What do you want me to do? Alexander asked, and for the first time since he'd walked in, he sounded lost. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know anything about kids. I built my entire company from nothing, but this? I have no idea where to even start. Rachel's anger softened. She could see it now. Underneath all that confidence and control, he was terrified. Just as scared as she was, maybe more. You start by learning about them, she said gently. You start by understanding who they are before you meet them. Because when you walk into their lives, Alexander, there's no taking it back. They've already had one man disappoint them. I won't let it happen again. I'm not going anywhere, Alexander said firmly. I want to be their father. A real father. I just don't know how. Rachel studied his face for a long moment. Then she made a decision that would change everything. Okay, sit down. Alexander sat on her worn couch and Rachel grabbed her phone. She pulled up photos and videos, 5 years' worth of memories. Michael's first steps, Daniel's quiet laughter, birthday parties in this very apartment with homemade cake and dollar store decorations. This is Michael, she said, showing him a video of a toddler with dark curly hair chasing bubbles in a park. He's loud and fearless and never stops moving. He wants to be a dinosaur when he grows up, and yes, I've explained that's not possible, but he's convinced he'll find a way. Alexander leaned closer to the screen, his eyes fixed on the little boy who had his smile. He asks a million questions about everything, Rachel continued. Why is the sky blue? Where do stars go during the day? How do birds know how to fly? And he won't accept simple answers. You have to really explain things to him or he'll keep asking until you do. She swiped to another video. This one showed a quieter boy, sitting in the corner of the room building something with blocks. His face was serious, concentrated. That's Daniel. He's the opposite of his brother in almost every way. He's careful and thoughtful. He doesn't talk much, but when he does, you need to listen because it's usually something important. He looks like me, Alexander said softly, and Rachel heard the wonder in his voice. Everyone says that. He has your expressions. That serious look you get when you're thinking hard about something. Michael got your eyes, but Daniel got everything else. She showed him more videos. The twins learning to ride bikes. Their first day of kindergarten. Michael singing loudly in the bathtub while Daniel read a book beside him. 5 years of life that Alexander had missed. With each video, Rachel watched something shift in Alexander's face. The businessman faded away and something else emerged. Something raw and real and heartbreakingly vulnerable. I should have been there, he whispered. For all of this. I should have been there. You didn't know, Rachel said. I don't blame you for not knowing. But I could have tried harder to find you after that weekend. We both could have done things differently, Rachel interrupted. But we can't change the past. We can only decide what happens next. Alexander looked up at her. What do you want to happen next? Rachel thought about her boys. About how they deserved a father who truly cared. About how Daniel had asked again just yesterday why some kids had daddies and they didn't. About how Michael had drawn a picture of their family at school, and it was just him, Daniel, and her. I want you to meet them, she said, but not yet. First, I want you to really understand who they are. I want you to be ready. How do I get ready for something like this? Rachel almost smiled. You spend time with me. You ask questions. You learn their routines, their favorite things, their fears. You prove to me that you're serious about this before I introduce a stranger to my sons and tell them he's their father. I'll do whatever it takes, Alexander said immediately. It's not going to be easy, Rachel warned. I work crazy hours. My life isn't glamorous or organized, and you'll have to fit into our world, not the other way around. I don't care about easy, Alexander said. I care about doing this right. Over the next 2 weeks, Alexander became a constant presence in Rachel's life in ways she never expected. He started showing up at the hospital during her breaks, bringing coffee and asking questions about the twins. What did they eat for breakfast? What scared them? What made them laugh? He took notes. Actual notes, like he was studying for the most important test of his life. Rachel found it both endearing and slightly ridiculous. You don't have to write everything down, she said one afternoon, watching him type something into his phone. I do, Alexander insisted. I can't afford to forget anything. I've already missed too much. He came to her apartment when the twins were at kindergarten, wanting to see where they lived, where they played. He sat on the floor of their tiny bedroom and looked at their drawings on the wall. Picked up their toys. Held their favorite stuffed animals like they were precious artifacts. This dinosaur is Michael's favorite? He asked, holding up a worn green toy. Mr. Chomps. He's had him since he was 2. Don't ever suggest washing it. Michael had a complete meltdown last time I tried. Alexander smiled, and Rachel noticed how different he looked when he smiled. Younger, less guarded. And Daniel's favorite? Books, any books. He taught himself to read at 4 because he was tired of waiting for me to have time to read to him. He taught himself? Alexander looked impressed. He's scary smart. They both are. Michael just hides it behind all that energy. As the days passed, Rachel found herself looking forward to Alexander's visits. He wasn't what she expected. Yes, he was wealthy and powerful. But when he sat on her couch asking about bedtime routines and favorite foods, he was just a man trying desperately to learn how to be a father. And slowly, Rachel's walls started to come down. She found herself sharing more than just facts about the twins. She told him about the hard nights when she'd cried from exhaustion. About the times she'd skipped meals so the boys could eat. About her fears that she wasn't enough for them. You're more than enough, Alexander said firmly. You've kept them safe and loved and happy. That's everything. One evening, 2 weeks after the DNA results, they sat on her small balcony after another long conversation. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I think I'm ready, Alexander said quietly. To meet them. If you think I'm ready, Rachel looked at him. At this man who'd spent 2 weeks learning everything he could about 2 boys he'd never met, who'd shown up every day without fail, who'd proven he was serious about this. Okay, she said. Tomorrow. After kindergarten. I'll tell them someone special wants to meet them. Alexander's hands were shaking. What if they don't like me? What if they do? Rachel countered. They sat in silence for a moment, both terrified of tomorrow, both hopeful. 2 people who'd created life together in one weekend 5 years ago, now about to become a family in the most unexpected way possible. Rachel had barely slept. She'd spent half the night rehearsing what she'd say to the twins and the other half worrying about everything that could go wrong. What if they were scared? What if they rejected Alexander? What if this whole thing was a terrible mistake? At breakfast, Michael was his usual whirlwind of energy, talking nonstop about the bug he'd found at school yesterday. Daniel ate his cereal quietly, but his eyes kept drifting to Rachel's face. He knew something was different. Mama, Daniel said softly, putting his spoon down. Something's happening today. Rachel's heart squeezed. That boy saw everything. You're right, she said, kneeling down between their chairs. I need to talk to you both about something important. Michael stopped mid-sentence about the bug. Both boys looked at her with identical expressions of curiosity and concern. Remember how you've asked me about your daddy? Rachel began, choosing her words carefully. The one who went away? Michael asked. That's the thing, baby. The man wasn't your real daddy. I thought he was going to be, but he wasn't. She took a deep breath. Your real daddy didn't know about you. He didn't leave on purpose. He just didn't know you existed. Daniel's eyes went wide. He knows now? He knows now. And he wants to meet you. Today. If that's okay with you. Michael's face lit up immediately. We have a real daddy. When is he coming? Is he nice? Does he like dinosaurs? But Daniel was quiet, his small face serious. Why didn't he know about us? Rachel had prepared for this question. Sometimes grown-ups meet and then have to go to different places. Your daddy and I met a long time ago and then we both had to leave. I didn't have a way to tell him about you when I found out you were coming. But now we found each other again and he really wants to be part of your lives. What if we don't like him? Daniel asked, and Rachel heard the fear beneath his words. Daniel had learned not to trust easily. Then we'll figure it out together, Rachel promised. But I think you should give him a chance. He's been learning all about you for 2 whole weeks. He knows about Mr. Chomps and your favorite books and everything. He knows about Mr. Chomps? Michael clutched his dinosaur tighter. He does. He wants to know everything about you. At 3 o'clock there was a soft knock on the door. Rachel opened it to find Alexander standing there and she almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the expensive suit and the polished appearance. He wore regular jeans and a plain t-shirt. His hair looked like he'd run his hands through it 100 times. He was holding 2 wrapped gifts, nothing huge or flashy, just simple packages. "Hi," he said, and his voice was shaking. "Hi," Rachel said. "Are you ready?" "Absolutely not," Alexander admitted. "But let's do this anyway." Rachel led him into the living room where the twins were waiting on the couch. Michael was bouncing with excitement. Daniel sat perfectly still, watching the stranger with careful eyes. Alexander stood there for a moment, just looking at them. Rachel saw his eyes get wet, saw him blink rapidly to clear them. These were his sons. Right here. Real and alive and beautiful. "Hi," Alexander finally said, his voice rough. "I'm Alexander. Are you our daddy?" Michael asked immediately, no hesitation in his voice. "I am," Alexander said, and Rachel heard the wonder in those 2 words. "I'm your father." Michael jumped off the couch and ran right up to him, no fear at all. "Do you like dinosaurs?" "What's your favorite?" "Mine is T-Rex, but Daniel likes Triceratops better because he says they're smarter." Alexander knelt down so he was at Michael's eye level. "I don't know much about dinosaurs yet," he admitted. "But I'd love for you to teach me." "Really?" Michael's whole face lit up. "Nobody ever wants to learn about dinosaurs. Mama tries, but she gets them mixed up." "I promise to pay very close attention," Alexander said seriously. While Michael started explaining the difference between various dinosaurs, talking a mile a minute, Alexander glanced over at Daniel, who was still on the couch, still watching. "Daniel," Alexander said gently, "I brought you something. Michael, too. Would it be okay if I gave them to you?" Daniel nodded slowly. Alexander stood and held out the packages. Michael grabbed his immediately and tore into it. Inside was a book about dinosaurs, but not a kid's book. An actual scientific guide with detailed illustrations. "Whoa," Michael breathed. "This has all the dinosaurs." Alexander turned to Daniel, who was opening his package more carefully. Inside was a collection of chapter books, advanced ones that most kindergartners wouldn't be able to read. "Your mom told me you love reading," Alexander explained. "These were some of my favorites when I was young. They might be a little challenging, but she said you like challenges." Daniel looked down at the books, then up at Alexander. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome." Alexander moved slowly to sit on the floor, understanding somehow that being at their level was important. Michael immediately plopped down next to him with his dinosaur book. But Daniel stayed on the couch, keeping his distance. Over the next hour, Rachel watched something she'd never expected to see. Alexander, this powerful businessman who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions, sat on her worn carpet and listened to Michael explain dinosaurs with complete attention. He asked questions. He admitted when he didn't know something. He never once talked down to her 5-year-old son. And slowly, very slowly, Daniel crept closer. First to the edge of the couch, then to the floor. Then finally he sat down on Alexander's other side and opened one of his new books. "This word," Daniel said, pointing to the page. "I don't know this one." Alexander looked at the word. "Constellation? It means a group of stars that make a pattern in the sky. Like the Big Dipper?" "Exactly like that." "You know about the Big Dipper?" Daniel nodded. "Mama showed us once from our balcony, but we can only see a few stars here in the city." "There are places where you can see thousands of stars," Alexander said. "The sky is so full of them it looks like someone spilled glitter across it." "Really?" Daniel's eyes were wide now, his guard starting to drop. "Really? Maybe someday we could go see them together, all of us." Michael popped up. Can we really?" "If your mom says it's okay," Alexander said, glancing at Rachel. Rachel felt tears threatening. This was what she'd hoped for. This careful, gentle approach. This respect for her and for her boys. We'll see, she said, the universal mom answer. The afternoon stretched into early evening. Alexander stayed on the floor with the twins, never pushing, never trying too hard. When Michael climbed into his lap to show him pictures in the dinosaur book, Rachel saw Alexander's arms wrap carefully around his son, like he was holding something infinitely precious. When Daniel asked him what he did for work, Alexander explained it in simple terms that a 5-year-old could understand. So you make computer stuff? Michael asked, sort of. I help people make new things with computers. That's cool, I guess, Michael said. But dinosaurs are cooler. Alexander laughed, a real laugh that transformed his whole face. You're absolutely right. But then Daniel asked the question Rachel had been dreading. Why didn't you come before? His voice was small, but the hurt underneath was huge. We're 5 years old. That's a long time. Alexander's face went serious. He didn't try to deflect or make excuses. You're right. 5 years is a very long time, and I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I didn't know about you, but that doesn't make it hurt less, does it? Daniel shook his head, his eyes getting shiny. I can't change the past, Alexander continued. I can't get back those 5 years. But I promise you both something right now. I'm here now and I'm not going anywhere. I want to be your dad. A real dad, not just someone who shows up sometimes or sends gifts. I want to be there for school plays and birthdays and when you're sick and when you're happy and when you need help with homework. I want to be there for everything. What if you change your mind? Daniel whispered, and Rachel's heart broke at the fear in his voice. Alexander reached out slowly and put his hand on Daniel's shoulder. I won't. I promise you I won't. And I know you don't know me well enough to believe that yet. But I'm going to prove it to you. Every single day I'm going to prove it. Daniel looked at Alexander for a long moment. Then he did something that made both Rachel and Alexander freeze. He leaned forward and hugged him, just wrapped his small arms around Alexander's neck and held on. Alexander's eyes closed. His arms came up to hold Daniel close, and Rachel saw a tear slide down his cheek. Michael, not wanting to be left out, threw himself into the hug too, and suddenly Alexander was sitting on the floor holding both of his sons for the first time ever. Rachel turned away, wiping her own tears. This was what she'd wanted for them. What she'd hoped for but never truly believed would happen. When she turned back, Michael was asking Alexander about 1,000,000 questions about his work, and Daniel was showing him his favorite page in one of the new books. They were talking over each other, competing for attention in the way kids do, and Alexander looked completely overwhelmed and completely happy at the same time. As the evening wore on, Rachel made dinner. Just spaghetti, nothing fancy. But when she called them to the table, Michael insisted Alexander sit next to him. Daniel took the other side. They said grace like they always did, and then Michael asked, Can Alexander come to dinner every night? We'll have to see about that, Rachel said. I'd like that very much, Alexander said. If it's okay with your mom. Both boys turned to look at her with pleading eyes. Rachel looked at Alexander, at this man who'd shown up and done everything right, who'd been patient and kind and real with her sons. Let's start with once a week, she said, and see how it goes. Deal, Alexander said, and the smile he gave her was so genuine it made her chest ache. After dinner, it was clear the twins were getting tired. Rachel started the bedtime routine and Alexander stood to leave. Wait, Daniel said suddenly. Will you read us a story? Before you go? Alexander looked at Rachel, who nodded. If you want to. So Alexander sat on the edge of their bed while both boys climbed under their covers, and he read from one of the new books in a voice that was steady and warm. By the end of the story, Michael was already asleep, snoring softly with Mr. Chomps tucked under his arm. Daniel's eyes were drooping, but he fought to stay awake. You'll come back? He asked. I promise, Alexander said. I'll come back. Okay, Daniel whispered, and then he was asleep too. Alexander stood by their bed for a long moment, just watching them breathe. Then he followed Rachel to the door. Thank you, he said quietly, for giving me this chance. Thank you for being who you are with them, Rachel replied. They deserve this. So do you, Alexander said, and there was something in his eyes that made Rachel's heart skip. But before she could figure out what it meant, he was gone. and she was left standing in her doorway wondering how her life had changed so completely in just a few short weeks. The once-a-week dinners turned into twice a week. Then 3 times. Then Alexander was showing up almost every day, and Rachel stopped being surprised when she heard his knock on the door. He came after work still wearing his suit, and the first thing he'd do was loosen his tie and sit on the floor with the twins. He helped with homework, though Daniel usually corrected his math. He played dinosaurs with Michael even when it meant making ridiculous roaring sounds. He read bedtime stories in that steady voice that made both boys drift off to sleep feeling safe. Rachel watched him become a father right before her eyes, and something inside her chest grew warmer each time she saw him with her sons. But then the media found out. It started with a photo. Someone had snapped a picture of Alexander leaving Rachel's apartment building. Within hours, it was everywhere. Tech billionaire's secret family exposed, screamed the headlines. Single mother traps millionaire with twins, wrote the gossip sites. The paparazzi showed up the next morning like a swarm of wasps. They camped outside the apartment building with cameras, shouting questions whenever Rachel tried to leave for work. Michael and Daniel were scared of the strangers with the bright flashes. Mrs. Chen couldn't even take them to the park without being followed. Rachel was at her breaking point when Alexander showed up one evening, his face tight with anger. "This is my fault," he said. "I should have anticipated this. I should have protected you better." "You can't control the media," Rachel said tiredly. She'd barely slept in 3 days, afraid to leave the apartment with the boys. "No, but I can control how I respond to it." Alexander pulled out his phone and showed her a statement his team had prepared. It was cold and legal, full of phrases like requesting privacy and no further comment. Rachel read it and shook her head. "This won't help. It'll just make them more curious. What do you suggest?" "The truth," Rachel said. "Tell them the real story. Not the trashy version they're making up, but what actually happened. That we met 5 years ago, that I couldn't find you when I got pregnant, that you didn't know about the twins until a few weeks ago. Take away their mystery and they'll move on to the next story." Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Okay, but I'm doing this properly. A real statement on my terms. And I'm making it very clear that anyone who harasses my family will face consequences." The statement went out the next day. Alexander didn't hide anything. He acknowledged his sons, explained the situation honestly, and made it clear that Rachel and the boys were important to him. The final paragraph was a warning written in legal language that basically said, "Leave them alone or else." It helped, but not completely. The photographers left, but the whispers remained. Rachel heard them at work, saw the looks from other parents at the twins' school. Some people smiled and congratulated her. Others looked at her like she'd won some kind of lottery she didn't deserve. The worst came from a woman named Victoria. Rachel was picking up the twins from kindergarten when a sleek sports car pulled up. Out stepped a woman who looked like she'd walked off a magazine cover. Designer clothes, perfect hair, the kind of beauty that made Rachel suddenly aware of her worn scrubs and messy ponytail. "You must be Rachel," the woman said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm Victoria, Alexander's girlfriend. Well, ex-girlfriend, I suppose. For now." Rachel's stomach dropped. "Alexander never mentioned you." "I'm sure he didn't. We had a little disagreement a few months ago, but these things happen in long relationships." Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I just wanted to see the woman who's been occupying so much of his time lately. And your sons, of course." Michael and Daniel had just come out of the school. They ran to Rachel and she instinctively pulled them close. "Interesting," Victoria said, studying the boys like they were objects in a store. "They do look like him. I suppose that makes this complicated." She turned her attention back to Rachel. "Word of advice, honey. Alexander gets bored easily. He's passionate about new projects, but once the novelty wears off, he moves on. I'd hate to see those sweet boys get hurt when that happens." She drove away before Rachel could respond, leaving her standing there feeling sick. That night, after the twins were in bed, Rachel couldn't shake Victoria's words. She sat on her couch staring at nothing, wondering if this whole thing had been a mistake. What if Victoria was right? What if Alexander's interest in the boys was just a phase? What if he eventually decided that fatherhood was too complicated and walked away? She was still sitting there when she heard a knock. Alexander stood in the hallway holding takeout bags. "I brought dinner," he said. I figured after the week you've had, you probably didn't feel like cooking. Your ex-girlfriend came to the twins' school today, Rachel said flatly. Alexander's face went cold. Victoria was there? She wanted to see the woman who's been taking up your time. She also wanted to tell me that you get bored with things, that you'll probably get bored with us too. Alexander set the food down and came to sit beside her. Victoria and I dated on and off for 2 years. It was never serious, at least not for me. When I told her it was over for good, she didn't take it well. She's been trying to win me back ever since. Is it true? Rachel asked quietly. Do you get bored easily? With business deals? Sometimes. With people who only care about my money or status? Absolutely. Alexander turned to face her fully. But Rachel, I could never get bored with my sons. Or with you. This isn't some hobby I picked up. This is my life now. You three are my life. We're so different, Rachel said, and all her insecurities came tumbling out. You're this successful businessman who lives in a penthouse. I'm a nurse who can barely pay rent. You have fancy dinners with important people. I eat cereal for dinner when I'm too tired to cook. Eventually, you're going to realize that we don't fit in your world. Then I'll change my world, Alexander said simply. Rachel, I don't want you to fit into my old life. I want to build a new life that fits all of us. That's easy to say. Then let me prove it. Alexander stood up and pulled out his phone. He made a call right there in her living room. Mark, it's Alexander. I need you to draw up papers. I'm stepping back from daily operations. I want to work from home most days, just handle the big decisions. Yes, I'm serious. My family is more important. He hung up and looked at Rachel. I've been thinking about this for a while. My company can run without me micromanaging everything, but my sons can't grow up without me being there. I don't want to miss another moment. Rachel felt tears building. Alexander, I'm not done. I also want to move you and the boys somewhere safer. Not a mansion or anything crazy. Just a house with a yard where the boys can play without photographers lurking. Somewhere with good schools nearby. Let me do this, please. I can't let you just buy us a house, Rachel protested. It's not buying you anything. It's providing a home for my sons. For our family. Alexander paused. That's what we are now, aren't we? A family? Rachel looked at this man who'd shown up every day for months now. Who'd learned to braid hair when Daniel wanted his long enough to try it. Who'd memorized every dinosaur fact Michael spouted. Who'd sat with her on hard nights and never made her feel weak for being tired. Yeah, she whispered. We're a family. The next few months transformed everything. Alexander found a house in a quiet neighborhood with a big backyard. Nothing too fancy, but safe and comfortable with enough room for everyone. The twins each got their own bedroom for the first time in their lives. Michael immediately covered his walls with dinosaur posters. Daniel created a reading corner with pillows and a small bookshelf. Alexander was there almost every morning, making breakfast before school. He was there for parent-teacher conferences and kindergarten performances. When Michael got sick with the flu, Alexander stayed up all night helping Rachel take care of him. Rachel watched her boys bloom with a father's love. Michael's confidence grew even bigger. Daniel smiled more, laughed more, let his guard down. They started calling Alexander Dad without anyone suggesting it, and every time they said it, his whole face lit up. But it wasn't just the boys who were changing. Rachel felt it too. The constant fear and exhaustion that had been her companion for 5 years started to ease. She could actually sleep at night knowing someone else was there to share the burden. She could take a bath without worrying about every noise from the boys' room. She could just breathe. And somewhere along the way, she fell in love with Alexander. Not the billionaire, not the powerful businessman, but the man who sat on the kitchen floor helping build a Lego castle at midnight. The man who cried when Daniel gave him a drawing that said, "Best dad ever." The man who looked at her like she was the most amazing person in the world just for being herself. One evening, 6 months after that first meeting, Alexander was helping clean up after dinner while the twins played in the backyard. Rachel was washing dishes when she felt him come up behind her. "Rachel," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" She turned to find him holding a small velvet box. Her heart stopped. "I know we did everything backwards," Alexander said, and she could hear the nervousness in his voice. "We had kids before we even knew each other properly. We built a family before we built a relationship. But I don't care about the order anymore. I just care about you, about them. About this life we're creating together." He opened the box to reveal a ring. It was beautiful but not overly flashy. a vintage design with small diamonds that caught the light. "Marry me," Alexander said. "Not because of the boys, though I love them more than life. Not because it makes practical sense, though it does. Marry me because I love you. Because I want to wake up next to you every morning. Because you're the strongest, most amazing person I've ever met. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you." Rachel was crying now, but for once they were happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course, yes." Alexander slid the ring on her finger and kissed her, and outside they could hear the twins playing, laughing, safe and happy and loved. 3 months later, they got married in a small ceremony in their backyard. Michael and Daniel were ring bearers, both wearing tiny suits and looking impossibly grown up. Mrs. Chen was there, crying happy tears. A few close friends from the hospital, Alexander's sister, who'd flown in and immediately fallen in love with the twins. As Rachel and Alexander danced at their reception, she thought about that angry text message she'd sent to a wrong number. 1 digit. One tiny mistake that had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, pulling her closer. "How none of this should have worked," Rachel said. "A wrong number text shouldn't have led to all this." "Maybe it wasn't the wrong number," Alexander said softly. "Maybe it was exactly the right one. Maybe we were always supposed to find our way back to each other. We just needed a little help from fate." Later that night, after the guests had left and the twins were asleep, Rachel stood in the doorway of their bedroom watching them breathe. Alexander came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We're really doing this," she whispered. "We're really a family. We really are," Alexander said. "And I've never been happier about anything in my entire life." Rachel leaned back against him, her hand resting on the small bump that was just starting to show. They hadn't told the twins yet that they'd be big brothers soon. That would come later. For now, she just wanted to stand here in this moment, in this house, with this family that had come together in the most unexpected way possible. Sometimes the wrong number turns out to be exactly right. Sometimes a mistake becomes the best thing that ever happened. And sometimes love finds a way even when the odds seem impossible. This was their story. And it was just beginning.